Okay, this is a one-speaker meeting. Please welcome our speaker tonight, the gentleman who needs no introduction, Cam.
I'm Cam. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is July 19th, 2005, and my home group is the 7:30 a.m. Sunday meeting at this very Marina Center. Different crowd at 7:30 on a Sunday morning. So many of the formats at this lovely Marina Center meeting stress that the speaker's share is his or her own opinion. I always like to do that whether the format says it or not. So I like to emphasize that what I'm going to be sharing is my own opinion. I do this for 3 reasons. Number 1, my life is bitchin'. And from time to time, I wake up convinced that the reason my life is bitchin' is because of my own personal awesomeness. I find it useful to check that thought. The second reason I like to stress this is that I have some opinions. I mentioned, I hope, that these are my own opinions, that sometimes cause a little bit of a ruckus in these rooms. But the third reason I really like to stress it is it reminds me of one of the things that I absolutely love about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I absolutely love the spirit of tolerance and diversity of opinion that is this program. And it makes me a little misty sometimes when I realize that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous was the first American institution that did not discriminate on the basis of race, national origin, sexual identity, gender, or mental health. And the thing that I just love about this, and I am one of those guys, right? I mean, at the beginning when we get sober, we hate the book guys, at least I did. I'm like, really, dude? Those people have been fucking dead 30 years and you're still, you know? But I've become that guy. And there's a sentence in the 12 and 12 written by the least anonymous of our co-founders, which speaks directly to this. It's on page 141. It's the thing about tradition 3. And so in context, they're explaining why they decided the only requirement of Alcoholics Anonymous should be, a desire to stop drinking. Because originally there were a whole bunch of requirements. I love this. By the way, the thing about the books is if you're not sort of, born in the first decade of the 20th century, some of the stuff seems like kind of crass and uncool and politically incorrect. But I think it's kind of useful to try to see through the verbiage to see what these guys were really thinking. So on the previous page, on 140, they're talking about these early days when they had many rules. And it goes, so beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. It's like, man, if we had hewed that line, these meetings would be a lot smaller. But it goes on to say, and I think it's great, why did we dare to say, contrary to the experience of society and government everywhere, that we would neither punish nor deprive any AA of membership, that we must never compel anyone to pay anything, believe anything, or conform to anything? I think that's bitchin'. I think that is like an institution that I can really get behind. Don't conform. Even in your non-conformity, please don't conform. So my opinions only. So my copy of the big book suggests that in situations like this, what we ought to do is share what we were like, what happened, and what we're like now. So if anyone cares to see it after the meeting, I actually have a visual aid of what I was like. I have to kind of put it in context. So back to the topic of my personal awesomeness. So I went to 2 very fancy universities. Fancy universities. One of these universities is so fancy that my diploma from it is actually in Latin on actual sheepskin. Fancy. Fancy, fancy, fancy. My classmates at one of these universities include the current president of the United States. Did I mention fancy? Fancy, fancy, fancy. So that's me, fancy and well-educated. Also, silver-tongued. Silver-tongued me from the cradle. Fancy and silver-tongued. So, on June 13th, 2005, which is about a month before my sobriety date, I woke up in a condo not far from here with a headache. This disturbed me a great deal because by that point in my drinking and using, I had adopted the practice of never sobering up because I really didn't enjoy these headaches. And I seem to remember just really drinking all night. I couldn't figure out why I had a headache. So I lifted my head and I dropped it and I heard a sploosh. You know, unless you're one of those groovers who like has a van with a waterbed in it, you don't want to lift your head and hear a sploosh. And I've never been, guy with a van. So I turned around and looked, and there was a pool of blood about the size of a manhole cover under my head. To this day, I have no idea how it got there. But I could not, in the aftermath, find my glasses. This is a real problem for me because I have 2200 vision. So if I don't have glasses, that's a real problem. So it's 6 a.m. I go down to the 7-Eleven, Amir Khan, it's the one right over here, the fancy sort of guys from Burma, very friendly, very friendly. At one point in my drinking at the end, Khan Muhammad would greet me every day with something cryptic, like he would say, "More is now revealing, Big Daddy." It's like, more is now revealing? There is joyousness, happy freedom for you, Big Daddy. And it was not until I'd been sober for a while that I realized he'd gotten a copy of the Big Book in Arabic, and he was 12-stepping me at 6 in the morning. So, I went and fortified myself, before driving to Lens Crafters on Pico Boulevard. 2200 vision, fortified, I drive to Lens Crafters. So I get a new pair of glasses, and about 2 years ago, it occurred to me for the first time, 3.5 years sober, that you can own more than one pair of glasses. Especially if you're a clumsy person. Like you can actually, have a spare pair of glasses that if you break the first pair, you just put on the second pair. That was a revelation to me. So I went down to the Lens Crafters and I got my prescription. And I was reading my prescription, and if anybody wants to see it, I can show it to you. At the corner is written the following words. Remember, fancy and silver-tongued. Subject lacked complete coherency in verbal instruction and expression, which likely affected results. And for me, that's pretty much the story of my drinking and using, right? Likely affected results. One of our founders in the early 50s, when people were really starting to pay attention to Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote a letter in which he proclaimed that there are two kinds of alcoholics, type 1, type 2. Type 1, flip the switch at 13, you're off to the races. Type 2 hits you somewhat later, often in the mid-30s. I'm a type 2 alcoholic, if that's true. I grew up in Nebraska, western Nebraska, the eastern end of the Mormon homeland, a place where men are men and women are too. And, there was just a ton of drinking there, and I just wasn't, down with it. And then I went off to school, and I did not actually taste alcohol until after my 18th birthday. And when I did, I didn't see what the fuss was about, because it would take me like another 10 years to realize that if you drink alcohol in pint increments, you don't get the effect that you do if you drink it in gallon increments. And it still didn't really hit me. I mean, it really didn't hit me until I was in my late 30s. And to this day, and this is, for me, the real freedom and the liberation of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because if anyone was more enslaved by the notion that thinking and reading can get you out of alcoholism, I'd love to meet him than me, because I was just convinced that this little problem of being wasted all the time could be overcome if I really just thought my way through it. And I look back and I don't have any explanatory factors for the time when I crossed that line. My career was going great. I was married to a wonderful chick. I mean, I'm close with my family. It's just, the reason I drank alcoholically, I realized in this program, is that, I'm an alcoholic. I mean, you kind of get that eventually, right? If you're an alcoholic, you drink alcoholically. And my experience at the end of my drinking was what I think is the common experience we all share. I couldn't stop. Knew I should, had many different plans about how to do it, couldn't stop. If you are here merely because of family, societal, parental, legal pressure, welcome. If you're here for the coffee, which is actually awesome tonight, that's cool too. If you're seeking a spiritual solution and you're halfway between, Zen Buddhism and crystal gazing, that's cool too. But from my perspective, what this is really about is the common experience of being unable to stop, whatever it is. I don't want to cause a ruckus. If you believe that it is inappropriate to discuss mind-altering substances other than alcohol in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I respect your opinion, and I don't share it. Because my copy of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous features, for example, the personal story of one of our founders who talks about how much he enjoyed sedatives. And I was so interested in this that I kind of dug into it. The sedative that our good doctor loved so much was Librium. So one of our co-founders, in addition to being an alcoholic, was a benzo junkie too. I mean, per the great Bay Area performing artist MC Hammer, in my book, it's all good. And I was a year sober before I figured out that I was also a drug addict. Because it didn't occur to me that you could be a drug addict if you used a drug prescribed for you by a real doctor who didn't go to Cal College Medical School, and you took the drug according to the directions. My prescription said use as needed. I never touched that stuff when I didn't need it. And it's one of the real blessings. It's one of the real blessings of sobriety, and I'm actually not being a smartass about this, that I was a year and a half sober before I realized that the first 6 months of my sobriety were so miserable because I was going through the benzo kick. And I was like, wow, that was awful. Okay, on to the next thing. And so for me at the end, the experience of alcoholism was just really simple. I lost me. I lost who I thought I was. I lost enjoyment in the things I enjoyed. And most importantly, when I went into treatment the first time, and I went more than once, there are people who tell the story of the white light experiences. That was not my experience. It took me 3 times. Somebody was telling me this terrible story about walking from Las Vegas to Palmdale, liquor store to liquor store. Took the guy 43 days. And I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And he was used to telling this story as a kind of, symbol of reaching the nadir of his life. And I started laughing. He's like, wow, that is really funny and tragic all at the same time. And when I was laughing at that, I realized I hadn't actually laughed in probably a couple years. I'm not down with having a terrible time. I like to laugh. And that's one of the things that I love about this program. Our book mentions the word laughter 27 times. That's a kind of a big, important word for us. And at the end of my drinking, I had lost that. I wasn't having fun, I wasn't me, I wasn't laughing. So what happened was, I decided I was going to solve the whole problem by going to rehab. I knew a little bit about Alcoholics Anonymous. It didn't sound like a good idea to me. It just sounded, terrible. So I thought I'd go to rehab instead. So I'm in rehab the first day, and people are sort of doing the Thorazine shuffle to a room. And I'm like, where are you guys going? And they're like, we have a meeting. And I'm like, really? What's that like? And they're like, it's an AA meeting. And I was like, dough? That's what this is? And I stood in, this treatment center, and I looked at the 12 steps, and I was like, you gotta be fucking shitting me. That's this? No, I have a physiological problem. It's complicated. There's no spiritual solution. Plus, look how easy this is. I'm gonna stand here and do this right now. Come to believe, It's like, how hard can that be? So I left treatment, and, I got drunk. So I went back to treatment. I was convinced that I had missed something. There was a secret there in treatment, and I had not been paying attention. So I took more careful notes the second time. And, I got out and I got drunk again. So finally what happened is my brother, principal of Gordon Rushville Public Schools in Gordon and Rushville, Nebraska, came and got me. Took me home to a treatment center in Alliance, Nebraska. 13 people there. I was the only one over 30. I was the only one with a full set of teeth. Crystal methamphetamine has radically altered the Rocky Mountain areas. And I was apparently the only person who could read. And it occurred to me that that wasn't so fancy. So I thought, you know what? Pardon me for being vulgar. Fuck this. You know, everybody says 12 steps, yeah. Let me try it. What do I got to lose? You know, another couple months hanging with the mentals, I can take that risk. And so I worked the 12 steps. I mean, it's real, for me, it was that simple. And, you know, going to fancy colleges and, you know, coming of age in the 80s at a time when it was really unfashionable to believe in anything, you know, down with Reagan, fuck the man, you know. I always thought that books were metaphorical, right? You know, it's like, I think the King James, but not to cause a ruckus, I think the King James Bible is a really beautiful book, right? That which is crooked cannot be made straight. Who can't groove to that? But I thought it was kind of metaphorical, right? Like, I don't believe Methuselah was 900 years old. I just believe he was really old. You know, I don't think David was 14 feet tall, just pretty tall, you know, taller than average. And my experience of Alcoholics Anonymous has been that that book is literally true. It literally, in my experience, is true that if you do the things suggested by the book, remember, don't conform, you know, do your whole thing. But if you do those things, you get the result that's prescribed. And again, I was a couple years sober before I could like make this work in my head. And what I finally realized is that I have been using for years a kind of book that is literally true. Certainly, many kinds of men and many kinds of women. I don't think it's in any way undercuts my masculinity to admit that I love to bake. Love the baking. Baking is precise. If you use the same ingredients, the same utensils, and the same methods every time, you get the same results every time. Life, I find, not quite like that. Love to bake. And I have a certain sort of fondness for the high degree of difficulty baking, you know, pavlova meringues, dessert souffles, right? And I have a cookbook that explains how to do that stuff. And I have found that if I follow the directions of this book to the letter, I get the result in the pretty picture of the thing I'm trying to make. So too with our book, Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been my experience that if you follow the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you take those steps, because honestly, it's not the kind of thing that's going to hurt anybody like actual work. So I try not to say work the steps. I say take the steps, because, you know, it's not all that terrible. It's not actually like work. If you take the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, you get the result. I believe that. I mean, look, sometimes it's not as clear what that result really is. I have been really rich, and I am sober, but I have not been really rich and sober at the same time. You know, our promises say, you know, we will lose our fear of economic insecurity. Doesn't say we're going to lose economic insecurity, just says we're going to lose the fear of economic insecurity. And that's been my experience. So that's what happened. I worked the steps. Here's what I'm like now. I'm a cheerful and enthusiastic person. I like the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a big fan of the big book. There's a couple things that don't reflect my experience. One of these things is the line, you know, we are people who would otherwise normally not mix. Not my experience. I have loved hanging out with alcoholics and drug addicts my whole life. Love the alcoholics and drug addicts. And here in Alcoholics Anonymous, awesome, right? It's like, dude, if you're here and you're not an alcoholic or a drug addict, you know, it's called the Unitarian Church. Check it out. You know? Now, of course, I continue to have many character defects. Here are a few of my character defects. I have a marked tendency towards judgmental douchebaggery. I continue to suffer from feelings of being more than. I have intellectual arrogance, and I sometimes actually, I try not to do this, but I sometimes cause real harm by being a smartass. Here's an example. Some years ago, I went to an AA meeting, and a brand new person right next to me was listening to the promises and turned to me and said, there are 12 of them. I was like, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. Okay. She goes, and 12 steps. I'm like, right. and 12 traditions. I'm like, right, what's with the 12? I didn't know, but I thought I had to say something, so I said, look, it's not widely known, but Bill Wilson had 12 fingers and toes. So, if you're that newcomer, sorry, if you know them, sorry, it's not good. So that's what happened. That's what I'm like now. Cheerful, enthusiastic, prone to douchebaggery, right? But the thing that I've learned is that, like the alcohol and drugs that LensCrafter identified disapprovingly, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has affected results. It's affected results in both affected with an A and effected with an E. And one of the reasons for that brings me to an opinion that I have that sometimes causes a ruckus. How am I doing, time-wise?
Quite a ways to go.
Okay. Oh, that's okay. Are you kidding? So I go to meetings a lot. And here's what I often hear at meetings. I hear people sharing, I'm just powerless, they say. I am powerless over people, places, and things. Powerless. Some shitty thing happens, they're powerless. Okay, so, if you feel powerless, I say rock on. Because, the 12 and 12 says don't conform to anything, don't believe anything, don't pay anything. But I'm not powerless. And my book does not say I'm powerless. My book says that I am powerless over alcohol. My book also says that I cannot control things. I just think there's a real difference between being powerless and being unable to control things. My book says, be thou not a douchebag. It says, you're not the actor who writes all the lines and hangs all the lights. You're not God, can't control stuff. But to me, being unable to control things is not tantamount to being powerless over them. And to me, every time I hear this, I'm just like, you should totally take a look at those 12 steps we've got. I mean, that's a whole thing about power in there. Because look, we are advised to come to believe that a higher power can restore us to sanity. I have, and I don't know why, I think it's pomposity, which is one of my character defects related to judgmental douchebaggery. But I still have a copy of the Oxford English Dictionary, the 32 volumes with the cute little magnifying glass. I don't know what I'm trying to tell the world. I don't know why I lug it from place to place. But my copy of the OED under powerless says, without power, helpless. Without power, helpless. That's powerless. And the way I see it, if you have a higher power, you are by definition not powerless. Whether your higher power is some sort of theological force that you've identified with and made a connection with, whether your higher power is this group conscience or, the famous and misunderstood doorknob or whatever it is, if through this program you find a higher power, you are not powerless. Now, I have a problem with this, as I'm sure will surprise none of you. Sometimes I actually, fuzz the difference. I start to think that the power I found in this program gives me control over things. And I always have to come back. I mean, that is the beautiful thing about our steps 6 and 7, right? It's like we come to the sense that what we're involved in the program of recovery is a process, not an event. And that was really hard for me to get, process, not an event, because I kept going to rehabs and so forth, and I wanted to stop being an alcoholic, be sober. I wanted that event to occur. Instead, what I got was a process, but it's a bitchin' process, right? So in the context of powerlessness, what I try to remember is that if I take the program seriously, if I interact with my fellows appropriately, I have a great deal of power, but it's very specific power. I have the power to try to be a decent person to the people I encounter, to love the people who love me, and to not completely hate the people who don't. I have the power to try to establish a contact with my higher power that helps me address my character defects. I have the power to avoid, insofar as it's possible, judgmental douchebaggery, and I have the power to take the 10th step again if I fail in attempting not to be a judgmental douchebag. And so for me, the whole essence of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is that we return to ourselves a basic kind of power. And for me, it's the kind of power that most addressed the terribleness of the end of my drinking. It was the power to be myself. You know, I don't actually believe that Alcoholics Anonymous essentially changes us, because I don't actually subscribe to the doctrine of original sin or anything especially like it. I believe that we can gain in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous the power to return to the self we once were, and to find, even if we've never found it before, our best selves. So I am enthusiastic about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I confess to having no sense of where the time is, but I'm sort of done. In the 1980s, when I was going to college, I was a big fan of the diminutive psychotherapist Dr. Ruth. Children, in the 1980s, we really didn't have the internet unless we were trapped in a basement computer lab, and certainly there was no pornography on it. And so a diminutive therapist talking frankly about sex was very interesting and engaging. And so Dr. Ruth used to close all of her radio broadcasts and public speaking engagements by saying, "Get some." And so I say, recovery, the spirit of Alcoholics Anonymous, happiness and joy, get some. I didn't get sober to crawl. I got sober to march, to stride, and sometimes to skip like a schoolgirl. I'm Cam, I'm an alcoholic.